Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Steady English Stories. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture this. It is the year 1624. You are standing on a small, wild island. There are no tall buildings here. There are no roads of stone. There are only trees, marshland, and the quiet sound of water lapping against the shore. Wild turkeys walk through the grass. Native people, the Lenape fish, in the rivers that surround this island. The air smells like salt and pine. Now picture something else. Picture that same spot, 400 years later. Instead of trees, there are towers of steel and glass, reaching so high they disappear into the clouds. Instead of silence, there is the roar of traffic and the hum of a million lives. This is the same piece of land. How, my friend, did a small, swampy island become the most famous skyline on Earth? That is the mystery we are going to explore today. Before we continue, let me ask you something small. If a story like this one about real history, told slowly, in simple English, helps your ears and your mind grow stronger, please consider subscribing to this channel. It costs you nothing, and it helps us keep telling these stories for you, my friend. Now, let's step back into the past. In the year 1624, a Dutch trading company, the Dutch West India Company, sent a small group of settlers across the ocean. A trading company, my friend, is a business that buys and sells goods, often across long distances. This company wanted a base near the mouth of a great river, so their ships could trade furs, cloth, and other goods with the people who lived there at first. The settlers landed on a small island in the harbor. But soon, the company decided to move to a better spot, the southern tip of a larger island nearby. They built a wooden fort there for protection. They named their small settlement New Amsterdam, after the great trading city back home in the Netherlands. In 1626, the colony's leader, a man named Peter Minuit, made a deal with the Lenape people who lived on the island. In exchange for goods, cloth, tools, and other items, the Lenape allowed the Dutch to settle there permanently. This event is sometimes remembered as the purchase of Manhattan. But we must be honest with you, my friend. The fairness of this deal is still debated by historians today. The Lenape people likely did not understand this exchange the way the Dutch did. For the Dutch, it was a legal sale. For the Lenape, it may have been closer to an agreement to share the land, not give it away forever. It is important that we say this plainly, without pretending it was simple or fair for everyone. And so, New Amsterdam began. It was small. It was muddy. It was rough around the edges. But it grew quickly, because it sat in a perfect location. A deep, protected harbor, at the mouth of a river that stretched far into the continent. Ships could come and go easily. Goods could move in and out. And people came too, not just from the Netherlands, but from many places. Walloons, Germans, English, Scandinavians, and enslaved Africans, brought against their will. All became part of this small, crowded settlement. Even in these early years, New Amsterdam was already one of the most mixed, many-voiced places in the whole of North America. What do you think happened to a settlement like this? Sitting on a narrow island, with so many people arriving and so little space to put them. In 1664, everything changed politically. English ships arrived in the harbor, and the Dutch, unable to defend the colony, surrendered without a real fight. The English renamed the settlement New York, after the Duke of York. The streets stayed much the same. The wooden wall that gave Wall Street its name stayed in place, though the wall itself would later disappear. But now a new flag flew over the growing town. Here is the detail, my friend, that our story truly turns on. New York sat on a narrow island. Land here was not like land in other American cities. It could not spread out easily in every direction. Water surrounded it on almost every side. As the population grew and grew and grew, the city faced a simple, hard problem. Where do you put more people, more offices, more homes, when you cannot make the island any wider? For almost 200 years, the answer was simple. You build outward, block by block, street by street, until you run out of room. But by the late 1800s, New York was running out of room. The island was filling up. Land was becoming expensive, so expensive that builders needed a new answer, and two inventions, arriving almost side by side, were about to give them one. The first was a new kind of steel frame, strong enough to hold up a building far taller than stone or brick ever could alone. The second was a machine most people had once been afraid to step inside the elevator, because if you could not build outward anymore, what if you built upward instead? And so, in the early 1900s, builders in New York began to test this new idea. Steel frames, bolted together like a giant skeleton, could hold up far more weight than walls of brick or stone. Elevators, once feared, now carried people smoothly up dozens of floors in seconds. Slowly, the city began to grow, not outward, but upward. One man, more than any other, showed New York what this could mean. His name was Frank Woolworth. He had not been born rich, my friend. He grew up on a farm and was turned away from job after job as a young man because store owners did not think he had a talent for business. But Woolworth had one small idea. A store where every single item cost just 5 or 10 cents. It sounded almost too simple to work. And yet, store after store, city after city, it worked. By the 1910s, Woolworth's 5-and-dime shops, a nickname for very cheap stores, numbered over 1,000 across America. And Frank Woolworth had become one of the richest men in the country in 1910. Woolworth hired an architect named Cass Gilbert and gave him an unusual instruction: build a tower that could be seen from almost anywhere in the city. He paid for the entire building in cash, without borrowing a single dollar. What rose from that instruction was extraordinary: a 60-story tower covered in pale, cream-colored terracotta, a type of hard-baked clay, decorated with pointed arches and carved details, like an enormous Gothic cathedral built for offices instead of prayer. When the Woolworth building opened in April of 1913, President Woodrow Wilson himself pressed a button from the White House, and 80,000 lights blazed on across the tower's face. A clergyman at the opening ceremony gave it a nickname that stuck for good: the Cathedral of Commerce. At 792 feet tall, it was, without question, the tallest building on Earth. Can you imagine, my friend, being the person who made the tallest building in the whole world, using nothing but 5-cent sales? For 17 years, nothing challenged the Woolworth building's crown. But by the late 1920s, the American economy was roaring. Money was flowing fast, And a new kind of contest quietly began, a contest with no official rules, but enormous pride at stake to architects who had once been business partners and had since become bitter rivals. Each set out to design the tallest building the world had ever seen. One, named H. Craig Severance, was building a tower at 40 Wall Street. The other, William Van Olen, was designing a striking new tower for the automobile maker Walter Chrysler. As the two buildings rose, their heights kept climbing, each side raising their plans the moment they heard what the other was doing. It became known, at the time, as the race into the sky. Here is where the story turns almost theatrical, my friend. Van Olen, working on the Chrysler building, had a secret. Inside the tower's crown, hidden from public view, his workers had secretly built a curved steel spire, a tall, pointed structure, piece by piece. When 40 Wall Street was finished and celebrated as the world's tallest building, Van Alen's crew suddenly hoisted his hidden spire up through the top of the Chrysler building in less than 2 hours and bolted it into place. In an instant, the Chrysler building shot past its rival to become the tallest building on the planet, standing 1,046 feet high. What do you think it felt like, my friend, to lose a race you did not even know was still being run? The Chrysler building's fame, though, was brief. Barely 1 year later, in 1931, an even larger tower opened just a short walk away, the Empire State Building, backed by businessman John Jacoby Raskob and former New York Governor Al Smith. This new tower rose at an almost unbelievable pace, more than a story a day, at times, and reached 1,250 feet, with an antenna stretching it even higher. On May 1, 1931, President Herbert Hoover pressed a button in Washington, and the Empire State Building's lights flared to life. It had done what no other building had ever done before. It passed 100 floors. For a moment, my friend, it seemed as though New York had reached the very peak of its own ambition. 3 record-breaking towers, each one grander than the last, built almost back-to-back in a single decade. But peaks, as you may already sense, rarely last without a price, because just as the Empire State Building opened its doors, the American economy was collapsing. The stock market had crashed in 1929, banks were failing, and businesses everywhere were cutting costs, not expanding. The tallest building in the world opened its doors to almost no one. Within its first years, nearly 3/4 of its office space stood completely empty. New Yorkers, with their usual sharp humor, gave the tower a new, less flattering nickname, the Empty State Building. The city had reached the sky. Now it would have to find out whether it could survive the fall below it. For years, the Empire State Building sat mostly empty, its owners covering the losses out of their own pockets simply to keep the lights on. But New York, my friend, has always had one strange gift: patience mixed with stubbornness. Slowly, through the difficult years of the Great Depression, and then through the Second World War, businesses returned. Soldiers came home. The economy rebuilt itself, piece by piece, much like the buildings themselves. By the 1950s, the Empty State Building was empty no more. It had become, instead, the most photographed, most beloved symbol of the entire city. But New York was not finished reaching upward. In the 1960s, city planners and business leaders dreamed of something even larger, not just one tower, but two identical towers, standing side by side, taller than anything before them. They called this project the World Trade Center. Construction began in 1966. It was an enormous task. Deep foundations had to be dug into the bedrock below Manhattan, and steel had to be shipped in from across the country. By 1970 and 1971, the North and South Towers opened their doors, one after the other. Each stood at 110 floors. For a short time, the North Tower held the title of the tallest building in the world, though, as we now know, that title never stays in one place for very long. The Twin Towers, as people called them, quickly became more than office buildings. They became a symbol of trade, of ambition, of the city's confidence in its own future. Nearly 50,000 people worked inside them every single day, and tourists rode elevators to observation decks near the top, just to look out over the whole of Manhattan. Do you see, my friend, how this story keeps repeating itself? A bold idea, a difficult climb, and then a symbol that becomes bigger than the building itself. But this story, like New York's story before it, would carry a heavy cost. On September 11th, 2001, the World Trade Center was attacked by terrorists who deliberately flew to hijacked planes into the towers. Both towers collapsed that morning. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives that day. Office workers, visitors, and the firefighters and police officers who ran toward the towers to try to save others. It was one of the darkest days in the city's history and in the history of the United States. We say this plainly, my friend, without exaggeration and without decoration, because the pain of that day was, and still is, real for many families and for the whole city. It deserves to be spoken about honestly and with care. For a while afterward, some people wondered whether New York would ever build tall again. Grief, understandably, does not rush, but slowly, over more than a decade, the city began to rebuild. In place of the fallen towers, a new building rose at the same site, One World Trade Center, sometimes called the Freedom Tower. It opened in November of 2014. Its height was chosen carefully and symbolically, 1,776 feet tall, matching the year 1776, the year the United States declared its independence. Beside the new tower, two enormous reflecting pools now sit exactly where the original towers once stood, built as a quiet memorial to those who were lost. What do you think it means, my friend, to rebuild something not just taller, but more meaningful than before? And so, if we step back now and look at the whole shape of this story, from a muddy Dutch trading post to a race between architects hiding spires inside their buildings, to an empty tower slowly filling with life again, to a tragedy and a careful, patient rebuilding, what do we actually learn from 400 years of one small island reaching for the sky? Here is the lesson, plainly stated. New York's story teaches us that growth is rarely smooth. It is built in stages: obscurity, then struggle, then a bold decision, then success, often followed by unexpected hardship, and then, if we are patient and willing to keep building, a kind of quiet recovery. The city never stayed down for long, not after the Great Depression, and not after 2001 each time. It looked at what remained, and it built again, sometimes taller, sometimes simply steadier. This is true for cities, my friend, and it is true for you. Learning English. Your own journey with this language will not be smooth either. Some days you will feel like the Empire State Building on its opening day, proud, tall, ready for the world. Other days you may feel like it did in 1932, a little empty, a little unsure whether all this effort is truly working. Both feelings are part of the same climb. What matters is that you do not stop building, one word, one sentence, one story at a time. Like this city, your progress will come in stages, and every stage matters, even the quiet, uncertain ones. Now, my friend, before we close today's story, I have one small favor to ask you. If this journey through New York's skyline helped your English even a little, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you have not already, so we can keep telling these stories together. And I would love to hear from you directly. In the comments below, tell me this: which building's story in today's episode moved you the most? The Woolworth Building, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, or the World Trade Center? I read every answer, my friend, and I would truly love to know. Until next time, my friends, keep learning.